That year, at 30 years old, I was tired of everything. I worked at a large technology company in Chicago and, despite the good salary and job security, I felt trapped. Every day was the same: endless meetings, tight deadlines, and boring dinners with bosses who barely disguised how much they disliked me. I needed a change, an adventure, to feel alive again. So, I did what many considered madness. I quit my job, took my savings, and decided it was time to explore the world. My first stop? New Orleans. I chose New Orleans because I had always heard about its unique energy, the music echoing through the streets, and its rich culture. I wanted to see all of that up close. And so, without a very defined plan, there I was, lost in the colors and sounds of the French Quarter, admiring the beautiful houses of the Garden District, and spending whole nights in bars where jazz filled the air. It was on one of those nights that I met Elizabeth, a local artist. She was fascinating, full of life, and passionate about her art. Quickly, I found myself drawn into her world, a side of New Orleans that few tourists know. Elizabeth invited me to a party at an old mansion in the city, promising an unforgettable night. And as promised, the party was lively, full of interesting people, music, and dancing. Everything seemed perfect. Elizabeth then suggested a toast, and I, excited by the atmosphere and the new friendship, accepted without hesitation. What happened next is hard to remember. I woke up the next day in a strange place, alone, with a pounding head and without my phone and wallet. I desperately tried to remember the details of the night before, but all I had was a void. When I finally managed to get up, I set out in search of answers, but the address of the party led me to an abandoned house. Elizabeth and the people I met that night seemed to have evaporated, as if they had never existed. That's when reality hit me like a punch to the stomach. I had been deceived, robbed, and abandoned with nothing in a strange city. Anger and fear consumed me. How could I have been so naive? The city that I saw as a refuge of adventure and discovery had turned into a scene of terror. Walking the streets of New Orleans, now with suspicious eyes, I could hardly recognize the place that had enchanted me days before. Every shadow seemed to hide dangers, every unfamiliar face was a potential enemy. The fear that something worse could happen consumed me. I was alone, vulnerable, and scared. This experience marked me in a way I never imagined. The adventure I sought turned into a nightmare that still haunts me. The anger and fear I felt that morning after the party never left me. New Orleans, with its mysteries and beauties, now had a dark side for me, a cruel reminder that the pursuit of adventure can have too high a price. I promised myself never to let my guard down again, never to be deceived like that again. The city that was supposed to be the beginning of a new journey became a chapter of terror in the story of my life, a chapter that I would give anything to forget. After spending a good amount of time out of the dating scene, feeling increasingly isolated in my routine, my best friend finally convinced me to try online dating. "It's the new trend, man, you'll see how easy it is," he insisted. Reluctantly, I eventually gave in and signed up for OkCupid, thinking that at the very least, I could meet someone interesting without having to leave the comfort of my home. After a few weeks of browsing the site and chatting with various people, I met Jessica. She seemed amazing, funny, intelligent, and with a quirky taste that matched perfectly with mine. We exchanged messages for a while, building a connection that honestly made me feel hopeful. When she suggested we meet in person, I was more than ready to say yes. Jessica proposed a date at her place. For a dinner she would prepare herself, followed by a night of indie horror movies, something we both loved. Although I felt a bit hesitant about going directly to someone's house whom I had never met in person, the idea of such a personalized date appealed to me. Besides, I was almost 6 feet 2 inches tall, while she barely reached 5 feet 7 inches. In my head, that gave me a certain advantage if things got out of control. However, to ensure my safety, I set up a code system with my friend in case I needed an emergency exit. He knew where I would be and would be on standby if he received the distress signal. Arriving at Jessica's house, she gave me a quick tour, but something about the way she lingered talking about her bedroom made me uncomfortable. Trying to ignore this detail, we moved to the kitchen, where my discomfort only increased upon finding out she hadn't prepared anything to cook. The dinner would be just an allegedly expensive bottle of wine. Frustrated and hungry, I found myself obliged to supplement the meal with whatever I could find in the kitchen. As the night progressed, it became evident that Jessica was more interested in getting me drunk than in watching any movie. My suspicion grew along with my irritation. Still, I decided to remain polite and give the rest of the night a chance. Maybe, I thought, things could improve. When it came time to choose the movie, my optimism vanished completely. She chose a Serbian film, known to be one of the most disturbing movies ever made. I tried to convince her to pick something else, but she insisted, arguing that I simply hadn't understood the genius of the film the first time I watched it. At that moment, I decided there wouldn't be a second date. But before I could execute my exit plan, the situation took a drastic turn for the worse. Jessica, perhaps motivated by the gruesome scenes of the movie, started to approach me in a way that I can only describe as predatory. When she attempted more intimate physical contact, oblivious to my growing discomfort, I knew it was time to leave. Discreetly, I sent the distress message to my friend, hoping for a quick and discreet way out. But for some reason, he took longer than expected to arrive. Trapped in that increasingly oppressive environment, with Jessica becoming more insistent, every minute felt like an eternity. When I finally received the emergency call, I faked an urgent situation that required my immediate departure. However, Jessica's reaction was terrifying. She screamed, in a tone mixing anger and desperation, "You can't leave." Her words echoed through the dark hallway as I ran for the door, my heart pounding in my chest, fear pulsating with every step. The walk to the front door was the longest of my life. The darkness of the hallway seemed to close in around me, and every shadow made me fear that Jessica might be right behind me, ready to drag me back into that nightmare. When I finally reached the door and opened it, the cool night air had never felt so welcoming. I ran through the streets of Portland, looking back every few steps, half expecting to see Jessica's figure chasing me in the darkness. My friend finally arrived, and as soon as I got into the car, I broke down. The relief of being safe mixed with the anger and fear of what? The expectation for that night was high. After weeks of exchanging messages filled with humor and depth with a guy named Nathan, we finally decided to meet. Nathan seemed like one of those rare finds online, funny, smart, and, from all indications, someone I shared many interests with. The virtual chemistry was so strong that when he suggested we continue our conversation at his apartment after a nice dinner, I agreed without hesitation. The idea of ending our exchange of ideas so soon didn't appeal to me at all. Upon arriving at his apartment, however, reality confronted me brutally. The place was in total disarray. The kitchen emitted an unpleasant odor, and the bathroom made it clear that cleanliness was a neglected task for a long time. But nothing prepared me for the shock when I glimpsed a suspicious stain on the pillowcase. For a moment, I thought about making up an excuse to leave, but a part of me still wanted to give Nathan a chance. After all, cleanliness is something that can be improved, right? However, the conversation that followed completely changed the course of the night. When he casually mentioned his son, whom he claimed to have no interest in meeting or taking care of, I felt immense discomfort. His indifference to something so important was revealing, and I decided it was time to end the night. With an excuse of tiredness and early morning commitments, I prepared to leave. Nathan seemed surprised by my sudden change of attitude, but he didn't try to stop me from leaving the apartment. The real twist came when I was about to leave the parking lot. Suddenly, I saw Nathan running towards me. For a brief moment, I thought maybe he had forgotten something in his apartment. However, his intention wasn't to return a forgotten object. In an impulsive act, he struck my windshield with such force that the glass cracked. The violence of that gesture left me paralyzed for a few seconds, but I soon reacted, accelerating the car away as he attempted to follow me. A few blocks away, still trembling and struggling to maintain control of the car, I stopped and called my mom, pouring out everything that had happened. She came to meet me and took me home, ensuring that I wasn't alone after such a terrifying experience. That night, which began with so much expectation and promise, turned into the worst experience of my life. In my first year at university, I never imagined that agreeing to go out with someone could turn into such a frightening experience. It all started on a sunny autumn afternoon in Boston, when a guy named Michael, whom I vaguely recognized from the university hallways, approached me with a charming smile. Michael had that irresistible combination of good looks and charm, and when he asked me out, I felt a mixture of surprise and excitement. Our first date was like something out of a romantic movie. Michael was the perfect gentleman, opening doors, pulling out chairs for me, and engaging in pleasant and interesting conversation. We had a delicious dinner, and for a moment, I allowed myself to imagine where it could all lead. However, as the night progressed, Michael started insisting on physical advances that I clearly wasn't ready to reciprocate. I had to be firm and make it clear that this wasn't how I saw things happening between us, especially so soon. After that date, Michael changed drastically. He began sending constant messages, at any time of day or night, showing irritation and even veiled threats when I didn't respond immediately. The climax was one night when he called me 12 times in a row, sending a series of disturbing and demanding messages. I was terrified, but I decided to confront the situation, telling him clearly to stop contacting me. Unfortunately, my attempt to set boundaries only made him more obsessive. Michael claimed to be in love with me, a declaration that left me simultaneously disgusted and scared. The messages that followed ranged from manipulation attempts to direct threats, an emotional roller coaster that left me in panic. I was alone in my university dorm room, away from my friends, absorbing every poisonous word and threat until, exhausted and emotionally drained, I turned off my phone and cried myself to sleep. The next morning, I demanded that Michael delete my number and cease all contact, but that only encouraged him to try calling me repeatedly throughout the next day, continuing his harassment until I turned off my phone again. The situation escalated to the point where I had to confront him over the phone, in a moment of desperation and anger. Surprisingly, he apologized and begged for another chance, but I was already determined never to see him again. I informed him that if he continued to threaten me, I would go to the police, a threat that finally seemed to have an effect as he fell silent and, after a few tense seconds, I hung up. In the following months, I lived in relative peace until Michael began stalking me online, commenting on my photos and posts on Facebook. I quickly adjusted my privacy settings, blocked, and reported his accounts, but the damage was done. He then started sending emails, to which I did not respond, choosing to block him completely instead. Just when I thought I was safe, the stalking took an even more sinister turn. Michael showed up outside the cafe where I worked, watching me for hours. Thanks to my manager's intervention and the call to the police, he was finally confronted and stopped following me. The police intervened, warning Michael about his actions, and since then, he hasn't tried to contact me again. However, the story didn't end there. A year later, I met a girl who had gone through a frighteningly similar experience with Michael. Together, we shared our stories and supported each other, forming a support network that, despite the distance, we still maintain to this day. That Friday promised to be the beginning of something special. After weeks of chatting with Derek online, where the connection seemed to leap off the screen, we finally decided to meet. He suggested a quiet dinner at a local restaurant in Springfield, followed by a walk in the city park. The plan sounded perfect, and the anticipation of finally meeting Derek filled me with excitement and anticipation. The dinner went wonderfully well. Derek was as charming and attentive in person as he had been online. We talked about everything, from our favorite horror movies to our dreams for the future. That's when he suggested we change plans. "How about watching one of those horror movies at my place?" he proposed. The idea of prolonging that connection was tempting, and caught up in the moment, I agreed. As we arrived at his house, something inside me hesitated. The residence, situated at the end of a poorly lit street, emanated a strange, almost eerie vibe, but I attributed it to the nervousness of the situation. Derek led me to the living room, where an extensive collection of old horror movies adorned the shelves. "Pick any one," he said with a smile. I opted for a classic, trying to keep the atmosphere light, but it didn't take long for things to start getting strange. Derek began talking about how he identified with the villains of the movies, describing their actions in a slightly too enthusiastic manner. Discomfort settled in, but before I could suggest changing the movie, the power in the house went out, plunging us into darkness. "It must be a blackout," Derek muttered, lighting candles with a calmness I couldn't share. The flickering light of the flames cast unsettling shadows on the walls, turning the familiar surroundings into a real horror movie setting. That's when I realized the door we entered through was locked. "For our safety," Derek explained, noticing my alarmed look. The feeling of being trapped there, combined with Derek's increasingly bizarre behavior, triggered an alarm in my mind. I made up an excuse about feeling unwell and needing to leave, but Derek insisted that I stay, saying that the night still held surprises. At that moment, my survival instinct screamed. With my heart racing, I ran toward a window, smashing it with a chair and escaping into the cold night. The sound of Derek's footsteps echoing behind me as I ran down the deserted street was all I could hear, besides my own heart pounding uncontrollably. Arriving at a busy avenue, I frantically waved to a passing car, whose driver, seeing my distress, called the police. As I waited, hidden in the shadows, the reality of what I had escaped began to sink in. The first date that promised so much turned into a night of pure terror, one I would never forget. Well, folks, we've reached the end of another chilling journey together. I hope you felt that spine-tingling sensation as much as I did. Stories like these remind us that sometimes reality can be scarier than fiction. If you enjoyed exploring the unknown and unraveling mysteries with me, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. It really helps us continue bringing more content to you. And, of course, if you have your own horror stories or creepy theories, don't keep them to yourself. Send them to our email, which is here in the description. I'm always eager to read what you have to share. Until next time, stay safe out there, and remember, It will always be a pleasure to be here with you.